All right. Well, with that, we should talk about our love or hate of Master and Apprentice
By Claudia Gray. Yeah.
I will be the first to say that.
Say it.
I just finished this last night. Like, I had like 40 minutes left in my audiobook. I'm like, I got to finish this last part. It has been a busy month.
So
that everything.
That epilogue is pretty fresh for you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the epilogue too.
I listened to that
it's
epilogue
always one of
10
those things.
times.
It's always one of those things where I'm like, I don't know where we should start with some of it because
Yeah.
like the later parts usually is fresher than the beginning part and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I really did enjoy like the future jump that we had. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is cool because it's extra stuff
Yeah.
in Obi-Wan's head that I didn't know. I didn't think I
Sure.
wanted to hear.
Yeah.
You know, like what was he experiencing? All we really got was like, what does Obi-Wan say to Yoda? You know,
Yeah.
that's pretty much all you really get from him in that moment, right?
Yeah.
So it was really cool to kind of hear that part.
I will say, and maybe this is me overanalyzing, but you know what? I don't think it is. I think Claudia Gray was pretty on point with this. I love the way this book handles prophecy. Not just the real. There's a lot of prophecies that we have to go. We're going to be going over each one.
I want to talk about those later.
But how characters react to something like prophecy, right?
Okay.
Like, I love that we have all these various discussions from points of view that we already know, new points of view too, yes. But then the things that are happening, like this book has one of the craziest twists, right?
Okay.
In a Star Wars book that I've read.
Sure.
And it exactly matches what happens to the galaxy in a way, right? Not so much, but
You're looking
no
at
one's
these
looking
guys,
over
you're looking
here.
at these guys, but
you
really
got these fighters and these guys and these clones come out of nowhere, and you got these battle droids and everybody's fucking fighting, and the Jedi are like, I don't know what to do. Who should I look at you and look at you and look at you, and I'm not looking at her, and fuck.
Sure.
That's exactly what happens.
Sure.
So when you think about Qui-Gon in this book talking about the people that gave these prophecies, they're probably seeing things in their own life and are talking about it. Or the ones that come a generation after, they see things in their life and they're talking about it. And then we have the real time the prophecy is at hand, which is now when we have the chosen one. But I think it's really interesting the way that Claudia Gray makes you doubt that prophecies are real, even though we know they kind of are in this universe. But two, Qui-Gon, he's focused on various things. He's not seeing that, like, hey, what's playing out here is going to be playing out throughout the galaxy. It's a prophecy in its own. You're just too focused on the mystics and not yourself or not in the moment. You know, even though he is the Jedi that is in the moment more than anybody else, I love that these various layers of, like, you can't look at everything at once, so why even bother? You know?
No, yeah, and you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even look at it, too, as, like, Qui-Gon very much so not looking to the future or the past as much and being in the moment. Like, maybe he's even more isolated in what's going on here, where he's not thinking about even later on of what the grand scheme could be in the future, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not what he is supposed to think about because that's not who he is.
Yeah.
And that's just always been his character with that.
Yeah.
But I did really like the portrayal of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, but I also enjoyed a lot of the other characters that we had.
Me too. There's
kinda
so much
just
to talk
around
about
it.
with this book.
Yeah. We also, I mean, we met Dooku's apprentice, right? Rael
Avaros.
Yeah. Like, what'd you think of that guy? I thought
he was really cool. And I kept dreading the moment that I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, I get you.
Especially early in the book was like, well, he was also a pretty good lightsaber fighter, you know? I'm like, all right, well, he's going to be the bad guy. They're going to have a lightsaber fight at the end. That's what these books do, you know?
Sure.
I'm like meta-analyzing almost like in a cynical way of being like, you got to put that in there. That way that's going to happen. That's way. I know what's going to happen. I prophesize it. Listen to me. You know, that's kind of what I had in my head. I was an idiot, you know? So I think halfway through the book, I started to disconnect from my enjoyment a little bit.
Was that because you thought of what was going to happen?
Until I loved the scene where Qui-Gon and Rael both are looking for quiet in the palace.
Okay.
And they happen to find the same spot. Mm-hmm. So Rael is just pissed at Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon's like, I just need to work out some shit on my own. And so they decide to spar.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful lightsaber fight, at least written lightsaber fight. The setting's amazing, and its ending dialogue is some of the best dialogue in Star Wars. I truly believe that. When they talk about when Rael, who was kind of obsessed with prophecies on his own, and he's like,
sure, yeah,
he's like that one about the chosen one.
It seems to be like Dooku Apprentice's like prophecies,
or
get obsessed with them at some point,
Because Dooku, we know that he has an ego. He sees himself. Like there's, we're gonna get into the prophecy stuff later. And which I definitely want to save some stuff for. But I just wanted to point out maybe my favorite moment in the entire book is Rael gets to the point when he's talking about the idea of the chosen one. He's like, you know what that means when you really think about it? What that creates? It creates a world in which the light and the dark are equal, right? And if that's the case, then what are we fighting for? Why does it matter to be on the light? And Qui-Gon goes into this thing about why it does matter. And I broke down in that moment. I've listened to it 5 times. I loved it. I thought Claudia Gray did in that conversation what hasn't been done with Qui-Gon Jinn since episode 1, which is make me feel like, what a loss.
Sure. Well, in the long run of that, too,
yeah,
they haven't used Qui-Gon enough since episode 1, I don't feel like, and
or at least we haven't been able to see it.
Sure. And there's not a whole lot that you can do once he's passed, but then, you get a little bit with, Clone Wars and different things, but it's more so just, his guiding, But those moments like that.
His tragedy of not being Anakin's father.
Sure, yeah. Which, this here had so many moments within Qui-Gon and possibilities that I'm like, well, I know he's not going to be on the council, But
right.
But I'm like, what if he was on the council? What would that have been like, And I'm just thinking about man, I love that the Jedi the council's looking at him like, we don't agree with you, but that's why we want you on the council,
exactly.
Right? It's like you would give us a different vision, a different viewpoint than what we already have, which I think is would have been perfect for what was going on and what would have happened in the future. But at the same time, the answer that he gives by the end of everything too, and I'm like, I love the idea that he wants the Force to guide him in a way. He wants to feel the Force and use that, and he thinks
what we've talked about on this podcast a couple of times now, what it really means to be a Jedi versus what it means to be an enforcer of the Republic.
Yeah, and his whole thing throughout a lot of this book is looking at the Council and what they're doing, and does he agree with them? Does he not agree with them? And I love that he's like, Let me have some time. Let me think about this. I have an apprentice.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to him? Who he's not getting along with.
Sure.
Well, to an extent, it's not like they hate each other, but it's just he feels that he's failing his apprentice.
Yeah.
And I just so many of those things getting into these. I would have never thought that that's how it was for him, given what we get of him in the movie. I don't feel like they're disconnected.
But now after reading the book, I can't not see it. I can't not see oh my god, dude, the I love the fight, yes, that duel that they have when they're talking about philosophies and stuff like that. But maybe my favorite moment, or close second, is when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon both realize at the same time why primarily Yoda put them together.
Oh my gosh, yes. That was one of the things that I wrote down where
amazing?
I'm like, I love it. Because I
love when I love Yoda's part in this book where he's almost an antagonist at a certain point.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that he thrives.
Well, even towards the beginning, into the middle of the book, I feel like, I feel like Yoda's against all this, which usually I don't feel like Yoda's against things. Sure. I feel like he's there to help, to guide, and not like he is an antagonist to Qui-Gon or to Obi-Wan or whatever, you know? But no, I agree with what you're saying with that. It felt like he was like, man, it seems like the rest of the council's more for Qui-Gon than Yoda is.
Yeah. But when Obi-Wan is talking about, it's weird because, Obi-Wan he's wrestling with this idea of, I need to listen to the council, but my master has gone completely against what the council has said.
Yeah.
Right? To the point where they tell me to do something my master says not to do. That's such an unfair thing to do, to put on someone who's, 17 in this?
He's 17 in this book,
But when he's like, master, when I was young, the earliest I can remember, I was a little rebel. I used to not listen to people. And, Qui-Gon has that thing where it's like, oh, my God. They didn't give you to somebody you can rebel against. They gave you to the ultimate rebel. So the only way for you to rebel is to be a really perfect Jedi. Yeah.
I love
Obi-Wan goes, nah, they did. I love Obi-Wan's, that's exactly what they did, didn't they?
It is. No, I thought it was great. Because, Obi-Wan, when I think of Jedi and stuff, I think of Qui-Gon as being man, I feel like his ideals are really good. But when you think of, who's a really good Jedi, I always think Obi-Wan's, one of the best Jedi, But why is that? He could have been entirely different had he been under, Ki-Adi Mundi,
sure.
Or maybe even Plo Koon or Mace Windu or something like that. But I like the idea, because Mace Windu is, he followed the rules, right? That's what he did. So you give Obi-Wan to him, and he rebels against that. But you have Qui-Gon who doesn't want to follow the rules. And I love the reasonings throughout a lot of this book. Like, there's different moments where it's like, even the ship they have, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they took this ship from these jewel thieves,
yeah.
Right? And it's like, why didn't we take a palace ship? You know, like, we could have done that. Why did we take this? Why are we having them fly us? But then you get to a point where it's like, oh, if it had been a palace ship, we'd have shot you down. Yeah. Right? We wouldn't even made it this far. And it's like, see, sometimes it's good to not follow the rules, not follow the
it fits Qui-Gon to a T, right? Like, he's like, well, okay, there's a Virgins in the Force in episode 1. You don't have any money. It's like, I'll bet on him. Mm-hmm. It's like, what do you mean bet? It's like, we're on a Hutt-controlled world and there's pod races. I'll bet. Like, you can't do that. You're a Jedi. He's like, live in the moment.
Right?
Here he's like, they're jewel thieves, but they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
You know? Because he has that philosophy. All is as the Force wills it. And you can't change that sometimes, right?
And there's no reason to look back, right?
Yeah.
There's no like, oh, well, we're on Tatooine where the Hutts are controlled. We should have went somewhere else. Well, we didn't. It's
almost as if like he's blaming the Force for putting me in this situation.
Yeah.
He's like, what? I'm on Tatooine. What should I do, O Great Force?
Yeah.
Exactly what's in the moment for me.
What has the Force shown me?
Yeah.
I found this little boy.
Yeah.
This little boy can race pod racers.
Yeah.
There is a pod race.
Yeah.
Like, all the information is being given to me. And if you believe the Force is giving it to you, then you follow what the Force does, right? And that's the same idea of what he wants to do and why he gives up the council seat is like he wants the Force to guide him. He wants to see where the Force takes him and what he can do. And thus he finds Anakin.
And it's the thing that I love that they definitely made me think about how Qui-Gon thought. The issue of slavery, the issue of...
Which is dealt a fair bit in this book.
Oh, yeah. The idea that we tolerate Zerka and, outside the Republic, we tolerate that. We are peacekeepers. Like, that is anti-peace. Like, there is no civilization that you can call moral that holds slavery as an institution. Like, it's just not. Like, I know some people are like, you can't judge history. It's like, yeah, you can. So I love that Qui-Gon, he's at this impasse. The Jedi Council are like, look, we'll fix that stuff later. But he's like, the Force and you, motherfuckers, put me here. Qui-Gon Jinn, the one guy that's going to be like, no, fuck you, I'm not going to do that. And that just informs so much of, like, if he had lived through the Duel of the Fates, he would have realized what slavery and what it does to you. Like, Obi-Wan gets Anakin Skywalker as a, like, you're no longer a Padawan, you're a knight, and now raise this boy. Mm-hmm. There's nothing about that that's going to make him, unless I haven't seen any material or read another book, like, there's nothing about the situation where Qui-Gon's going to be like, what's he thinking about his mom? How's he thinking about slavery? Like, Qui-Gon might have went back and
freed the slaves.
Tried to do something about it.
Right?
Anakin wouldn't have had that resentment and fear and a tool to be used against him.
He might not have lost his mom, you know?
Yeah, and
like, that
you can't say that that's Obi-Wan's fault, That's just, he's the by-the-book Jedi.
Well, sure.
Qui-Gon would defy the entire council just to train the kid. Of course he's going to defy the council and go rescue the kid's mom so that he doesn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
What
was it? In this book here, the council's like, no, let it go because there's other worlds that we need to have, supplies to, resources to, whatever it is that this is going to fix. Mm-hmm. We'll fix that for other worlds that will be suffering. Sure. It's like, but the slavery here is not important enough to stop if we can help those worlds. Which I'm like, I understand a little bit. It's kind of like that, the needs of the one versus the needs of the many kind of idea. Sure. But Qui-Gon's like, it's not, I don't know, it's not good enough. But then
you have that terrible scene, whose point of view of Rahara we see of, like, the people that are down there. There's that one, what was he, a Rodian that, like, gave them time for their escape or whatever. Yeah. And you just want to save these people. Like Qui-Gon is right, where it's like, if we don't fight this battle, what the fuck are we doing? Like, we can't tolerate this stuff. Like, the Republic, he's right. Like, it's because of stuff like Zerka. It's because of stuff like the Empire that we'll see, like, in shows like Andor, where this type of thought needs to be eradicated.
Sure.
Not just, like, tolerated until we eventually smooth out the details. What is our Jedi not meant to do but to free others from bondage?
Sure. Well, and even to the buildup of everything for, like, the main climax of it all, you have the queen, I guess, at that point, who is like, oh, look, they're revolting, What was it? Katie, I think, was with her. I think was the name of it.
KD with
KD.
CADY. KD.
KD. So KD is there and is like, look, they're revolting. The slaves are doing this. But, like, she doesn't care. And, like, in that moment, they're like, this isn't about the slavery and everything that we've talked about. This is about you and your power. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is what it comes down to. You can look at the Empire with all that, Zerka and what they're doing, and it's about the power that they have over these people. It's like, well, if I can make a deal and hold on to my power, I'll do that. I'll take out Zerka to hold on to my power. I'm not taking out Zerka to stop slaves. Yeah. So, this book reflects on a lot of that stuff. And then throughout, every time they mention slavery, I'm always thinking about Anakin being a slave and Qui-Gon looking at that and like, what would he have done? Because he didn't have any time. He was busy with another thing. But once he was no longer doing that, it wasn't like he could we'll go back to fix Naboo after I deal with slavery here on Tatooine. I was like, that wasn't necessarily what they were after. He needed more.
On the flip side of all this too, because I think Qui-Gon's correct about a lot of it, but I think Yoda is right about a lot of stuff. I think Obi-Wan is right about a lot of things in this book. Their arguments were fantastic, and just the way that both Claudia Gray wrote them and the audiobook performer, like his
Jonathan, I want to say,
whoever he was, like, I could just, in my head, I was like, okay, it's this shot of Liam Neeson from here. He gets up, he goes to the window, like, then I was like, it was so well done that I could just see it on the page.
Jonathan Davis.
And I very much enjoyed his performance, and then Claudia Gray's just scenes. But I really loved thinking about Qui-Gon not being correct or being too focused on something. When you think about Episode 1, and Anakin's like, have you come here to free us?
Yeah.
And he goes, I didn't exactly come here to free slaves. He's not focused on slavery right now. He's focused on the prophecy of the Chosen One. There's a boy with 20,000...
Sure.
Like, a really cool thing in this book I like is that Claudia Gray kind of establishes Qui-Gon as almost as like a natural lie detector. Like, he can just kind of tell when you're not, he might not know what your motivations are,
or why
but
you're doing.
Like, he can trust when someone says something true. I trust that he knows if that's the case or not. There's just something about him that maybe it's just his natural charisma or something, but you apply that to something like Shmi Skywalker, who says something unbelievable. It's like, I can't explain it. I
had no father. There was no father.
I carried him. I raised him. I gave birth to him. I can't explain it. Qui-Gon doesn't go like, well, that sounds like bullshit. He goes, I believe her. This is a virgin in the Force, one who has no mother,
Yeah.
And now he's not thinking about freeing slaves. He's thinking about, oh my God, this is the most important thing that's ever happened. I have to get this kid out of here. Give him the Jedi. The Jedi say, no, fuck it. I'll do it myself, I like that there's something great about that, but there's also something abhorrent about that, where this man who previously said, like, slaves, we can't abide this, just is like, all right, I'm taking the kid. Peace, Mom, Like, they didn't come back and free her with money or anything after. It's not like he talked about it. He was so focused on the chosen one, that he's not thinking about slavery.
I think that's on his mind, but I think it's also like he has the other thing at hand too, right? There's this occupation, there's the queen and all that, where it's like, I can't risk the queen's life by trying to stop slavery here or getting this other slave out of here. I got this one out. This is part of the possibly the prophecy that he's looking at.
I definitely agree. I'm just saying, I think that someone that was characterized in this book, and I truly believe him to be the same character, his response of like, well, I didn't exactly come here to free slaves, is kind of like nonchalant. And I guess I'm trying to like give meaning to it, in that we also see in this book, like, Qui-Gon narrows in on the moment, and there is something to be said that, like, you could be too narrow-minded.
Sure. I mean, he gets very focused on the prophecy ideas and stuff too. But I don't know. I would think that if they would have finished, Darth Maul, if things would have changed, if the things Obi-Wan said at the end, where it's like it should have been me and not him, kind of thing. If it had been Qui-Gon later on, and he had this apprentice of Anakin back at Coruscant, I think that he probably would have gone and maybe tried to do something with the slavery and whatnot. But I don't know. It's hard to tell, As far as like talking about like Jedi and everything too, Rael. I found him to be a very interesting Jedi.
Yeah.
When I don't know, there were different moments through the book where I'm like, this guy's a Jedi, I'm like, he's talking about how it is to be laid and how, like, well, they say love's off limits, but sometimes you gotta get laid anyway. And it's like, okay, interesting.
Which he's not incorrect about.
Yeah, no.
Even from a Jedi point of view.
But then they go through how he's like this.
He's so anti-Dooku. I love it.
He is.
You know how like you had that thing where it's like you either are exactly like your parents or the exact opposite of your parents. Like like that's kind of I feel like with that.
Yeah, when they're talking about what he's wearing as clothing and stuff like that, if you compare like Dooku in this cape and Count Dooku, he wears silk pajamas to bed and stuff, and then this guy's like, I guess you can call him clothes.
Yeah, right.
Like
his office is like dusty and all these stuff is stacked up, but Dooku's is like he's recently clean. Oh, I will clean this.
Yeah, it's like pristine. He has this little cupboard for lightsabers and stuff that he, all this stuff, and it's interesting to see the comparisons and stuff between like Dooku, Rael, and also Qui-Gon as like different apprentices. And I love the flashbacks that we get where it's like, here's younger Qui-Gon as an apprentice talking with Dooku, talking to Rael sometimes, and like
taking revenge on that bounty hunter.
Yeah.
That Qui-Gon gets cornered with. Mm-hmm. And we know what's happening. Qui-Gon doesn't, but we know he lit that motherfucker up. Like, you're going to do that to my apprentice just to satisfy. It was like, because this bounty hunter has this thing where, like, I'm going to kill somebody from 1 to 200 of every age. I've killed a 13-year-old and I've killed a 15-year-old. And then you just hear, like, because I was so confused, too. Because she says that to Qui-Gon, who's young. He's, what? He's 14
I think he's 14
old.
in that moment.
And Qui-Gon just says, like, and then suddenly there was this big giant flash of light, and she's gone. And I remember being like,
"What happened?
What the fuck was that?" And then like,
is this like the High Republic book?
Yeah, I was like, "What do you mean flash of light?
Where'd he go?
Did she get shot?" And then it mentions like, and then the cold thudded boots come out, and Dooku appears, and I go, "He didn't shoot her with lightning," and he shot her with lightning, and he's shooting her again, and she's screaming to death.
He's shooting her again.
What a moment.
No, I mean, it's...
And Qui-Gon jumps out, Master, stop! Oh.
Sure.
But I love, Rael, who we're talking about, like, he's just like, what? He was going to kill you? Like, he has such a different way of thinking about it than Qui-Gon does.
It's kind of the Anakin way, right? Yeah. Remember, like, what? He was going to blow up the ship. It's kind of like that a little bit.
I love that.
But no, I like the way Rael was, and like I get what you mean. I thought he was going to be much more antagonistic, especially when they were having some of their conversations about like, the contract that they have drafted or whatever, and where things are lying.
Yeah.
The what's the quote of it where it's like it will be as the sun is with the moon kind of thing, where
forever
it's like
and ever.
Basically, it's just it's forever. This is always going to be Zerka's just gonna have it forever.
Yeah.
And it's just like there was an argument with that, and it's like, well, I worked on this draft with people and stuff too, and it's like, well, he's connected to it. He has his connections to Flannery. Fanry has connections with her and stuff where he's like watching out for her, and I was like, is there like a little bit of a romance thing here? Is he just really care about this person? Like what are we doing with that? And then like,
dude, when Fanry like reveals herself and what she's doing
with the sword,
I mean, shit, I was like, I went back, a little bit. It's like I heard that wrong. But whenever she mentions like, well, when you were talking to me and raising me, you weren't talking to me. You were talking to your Padawan you lost. I want to be like, you bitch. I was so mad. She's right, but I was so mad because, in that one duel that Qui-Gon and Rael have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, he talks about like when Qui-Gon leaves that, and he says like, look, it is needed. We need to be in the light because no one else is. Someone has to, right? Like, I love that when he leaves that, Qui-Gon has an internal monologue where he says, I hope one day Rael will indeed be motivated by his ideals and not his shame. Because I think that was a very poignant thing. And I immediately thought of Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi.
Okay.
Right? Like, everything that is Luke's whole point in that movie.
It's a good point, yeah. Like, what are your ideals versus, like, what do you feel for what you did?
Yeah.
And
Like, Luke himself was an ideal that he felt like I can't do that.
I can't live up to that.
Like everybody's looking at Luke Skywalker, the man who blew up the Death Star, and the man that stops the Emperor, and the man that is the last Jedi Knight, and is going to raise everything. He can't ever make a mistake. And then when Luke makes a mistake, he says the shame that hits him, it rules the rest of his life. And Rael has been living like that for 15 years or whatever it was. I silently in my head was like, taking the lines I was hearing from Qui-Gon as if he was speaking them to Luke, and it became such a more, like, way more like, holy fuck, what a great book.
Sure. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned about the fight and stuff too, you said about liking this fight and everything. Yeah. I think it was in the Into the Dark book where you were like, "This has one of the best fights. I could visualize everything that happened here." Did you feel like that way with this one, or not so much?
This was such a much more emotional fight where they were fighting between ideals. Mm-hmm. The fight that I mentioned last time, I loved the physicality of it, and that there is a very clear motivation from one and a clear motivation from other, and they are opposed. They're not enemies, but their motivations are opposed at this point.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I loved thinking about the choreography. How do you express that in movement and in a cinematography space, right?
Okay.
But this fight was much more like old friends long gone against each other in terms of ideas, but would never harm each other. Mm-hmm. That could be as equally interesting choreography wise, yes, but hitting something a little bit deeper in that they both just need to try to work something out, and they are trying to achieve goals that don't make sense, like when you put them next to each other.
Yeah.
But they both kind of got what they wanted out of that fight too. I just thought it was a very interesting moment. And ending with the whole, motivated by ideals versus by shame sealed the deal on that scene.
Sure.
Like I had to just kind of like stop for the night.
I'm done. I'll stop here.
Yeah. We did. We've already mentioned Rail, and
yes.
Claudia Gray does this really cool thing where she actually casts her new characters,
like in her mind, who these characters kind of are portrayed by. And
I think in the future, I'm going to try to look up first.
I think that's not a bad idea. The only thing though is like I don't know. I guess it might be okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes like Into the Dark, like I didn't want to know.
I understand
what a Drengir necessarily looked like.
Yeah.
But like maybe like once I meet them, okay, now what do they look like?
True.
So maybe I should wait and like let myself get to that point and like, okay, here's this person. What do they look like?
Yeah.
And then here's this. Who do they look like?
But
here's a rock. Who's this rock look like? Oh, it's a rock.
Yeah. Sure. Right. But I did like this casting. Benjamin Bratt as Rail Averos, which I know him from Law and Order.
Oh, really?
And
I know him from one thing.
Doctor Strange. In the first Doctor Strange movie, he is the guy that's using magic to play basketball.
Oh, I was just going to say, I forgot about that. I was going to say Miss Congeniality.
I haven't seen it. I need to watch Miss
That's what I know him from. Is he's like there's Sandra Bullock, and he's like the co-star with Sandra Bullock, like one of the main characters.
And I think I've seen him in like, what was he in Elektra or was he in Daredevil or Catwoman maybe? He's the guy that's also in the terrible basketball scene from one of those movies.
I think you just watch him doing basketball stuff. Huh?
No, Rick showed me. Okay. I'm like, I know that guy. He's in Law and Order.
Okay.
But anyway, oh yeah, he also is in Modern Family as Manny's dad as well. Anyway,
I haven't seen that either.
I've always liked him as an actor, so as soon as I saw that, it was very easy for me to maybe not hear the voice that's coming out of the audiobook, but
sure, yeah,
I
would not
very much talks like this.
Yeah,
Qui-Gon.
I didn't picture him. With that voice,
but I liked the idea that he came to the Order a little late. He was 5 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So he still kind of had his accent.
But they said that, and I'm like, but
I know.
And then later on, Anakin
was
I was like, he was 9 years old.
Yeah. Well, that's why. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Like Qui-Gon sitting there is like, all right, train this boy, and they're all looking at him like, no. He's like, I'm gonna do it anyway. It's like, no, you can't do that. He's like, yes, I can.
You can do it.
Obi-Wan's like, man, what are you doing? And then he asked him and I said this too, my top 5 Obi-Wan Kenobi moments is the acceptance of the promise, but in his final moments, he believes in that so hard. He has faith in that prophecy so much. He asked Obi-Wan Kenobi, who plays by the rules, to promise to train this kid, which defies all the rules.
Yep.
Well,
and it's like one of those things where it's like, I promised him I would do this. It was the last thing I promised him. I can't not do it, Like, it's weird because it's breaking a rule, but it was like his last wish.
Yeah. And I love that you can inform on that very powerful scene that, again, is my number 1 Obi-Wan moment. Has now been changed a little bit by this book.
Sure.
Because Obi-Wan does not believe in these prophecies, but he believes in Qui-Gon.
Yeah. Well, I like the conversation, or not conversation, but his thoughts in there too. It's like, it's perhaps unprecedented.
Yeah.
I I'm a Jedi Knight now. I was just a Padawan. Now I'm a Knight, and I have an apprentice. Like usually there's time. Like usually like you go and you spend time doing something.
Yeah, he got a field promotion.
Yeah, right. In the what was it? Into the Dark, I think it was. We had someone who was like a newer Jedi Knight who was like journeying out to do other things. Like that's kind of what they're supposed to do before they get an apprentice. But he's just like, you get an apprentice now. So I kind of like that. Like that trouble in his head, those thoughts in there and stuff, and I was just like, and then like him being like one last goodbye kind of thing too before lighting everything, and it was a really good scene.
Really good.
Like man, and he's like, da-na-na-na, like
I know.
He's bittersweet.
I believe, Master.
Some of the other casting I don't know as well.
Okay.
I don't know Pax at all. I don't know if you know the actor that Claudia
I don't know
had.
the actor. Pax is
Sean Evans is
Sean
the
Evans,
name.
which I believe is a UK actor.
It might
I just
be.
haven't seen anything
There was a
been in.
movie more recently called, I think, Endeavor.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. There was a few other movies too that I didn't recognize at all. Nothing that I had seen necessarily.
Now I'll say that I don't really, I'll probably check out something from this guy, but I thought his character jumped right off the page because he's effectively C-3PO with an ego.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful.
I didn't like him much, and then
annoying.
I enjoyed him more and more as it went.
You know another character that I do that with? C-3PO.
Really?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was like, I don't care. But now as an adult, I'm like, I get it. I get what they're doing with that character. So I feel the same way. I just thought it was really interesting that effectively he is a protocol droid with a soul, right? And he comes with the soul first, and then the protocol droids that raise him change him. Whereas we usually see droids that get kind of changed by their owners, right?
Yeah.
Like 3PO is a protocol droid that lives in the Senate, and he's with a Naboo senator. Whenever you think about 3PO's ego, what is it usually about? It's never like, I'm a badass, or look at my friends. It's
what
like,
I know.
I know shit. And no one can take that from me.
I know the odds. I know the languages, but no one lets me talk about it.
Exactly. But he's not going to be the one that decides, actually, I need to go do this. That's R2.
Sure.
R2 hangs out with Anakin, who does shit all the time that doesn't make sense, right? Mm-hmm. So I personally thought that Pax was kind of like a character that starts as 3PO and ends as R2.
I get what you mean. I really liked at the end where he goes to get
I pumped my fucking fist when he decides to go get her.
Well, even the conversation, like
Brahara.
Yeah, I was like, you wouldn't. I thought you said that this isn't things that you would do. Like you're endangering yourself. There was like a conversation they had where I'm trying to remember the exact quote of it, but it was like, if one of us gets lost, then that's where they go. It's like they're gone, and I continue with where I'm going. You don't risk yourself when someone else has been taken or killed or whatever it is in danger.
I love
but
that
he
you
is
can
willing.
hear the 3PO in his voice, in his head, and he's fighting against it.
I'm trying to think of moments when 3PO was like, "We gotta go," and it's not typically a 3PO thing, but I like that. That's
he doesn't do that.
That's where it goes to, and he's like, "I will go and save her. I will go, and risk my own life." Yeah, and I really like that a lot.
I mean, we can be endeared to 3PO, but we don't think of 3PO as being like, no, we have to do this because it's the right thing. He goes, no, we have to do this because it's protocol. Yeah, And I actually loved there was a line in there where the protocol droids that raise Pax were like, we should just rule the galaxy. I mean, we don't like want to hurt anybody. We just would follow rules. And there was a part of me going like, yeah, the Jedi really should have like just focused rather than like the Republic. Droids. Yeah. Droids can do the logic, we can do the feels, and we'll rule over everybody. But obviously, you wouldn't want to do that.
No, you don't want that. Yeah. There's a moment there, before we move on too far from that. One is a question. Two is a question. One is, I liked whenever his, like, Qui-Gon, like, broke him at the end, where it's like, we've definitely lost money on this, and da-da-da-da, and we'll hopefully recoup it at some point. And then Qui-Gon's like, here, why don't you take this? And he's like, but we could stay here for another 3 years and still be okay. You're just going to give this to us? And it was like, it blew his mind because it didn't make sense because of that protocol type of ness, right? It was like,
Qui-Gon did to him what he did to himself, where he's like, it does not make sense to stay here and try to save this kid. Yeah. But I'm going to anyway because it's the right thing to do. And then Qui-Gon later, like, it doesn't make sense to pay you for your services with this, but I'm going to anyway We're in the moment. I know that you'd like it. I think it's a really beautiful way of like rewarding him in a way. Maybe reward is the wrong word. Like validating.
Sure.
That
thank you for your help.
Not everything needs to make sense. Sometimes people just need
to help people,
to love you,
to care about each other or something. You know.
I think that I let one of the previous books relationships between a pilot and his crew blind me, like, oh no, these two actually like each other. I thought it was more of like a mentor relationship, but it turns out he just had some shit that he had to deal with, and I think he's into that girl.
Sure.
Yeah.
The other part of my question, and I don't know if I missed it or if Chad or you have an answer for this, or maybe it's something in another thing, but like he gave him like a Mustafarian gem and then talked about what it meant and where it came from, and I'm like, am I forgetting a part in this book that I listened to earlier of where this gem came from? Because I don't remember where the gem came from.
They mention Pax and Rahara are talking about like the things that they could be spending their time on, and like this is actually good shit. And they mention the Mustafarian gemstone as one of the things. Like, oh, that would be the dream to find a cache like that.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, that's really the only thing.
But they didn't, like, Qui-Gon didn't talk about why he was carrying that, right?
No, they only speak that Qui-Gon keeps things, like, as kind of mementos to various adventures and stuff that he does. Other Jedi don't do it, but Qui-Gon in his room, you'll find just really interesting things that he'll put on the shelf.
Okay.
It's interesting to think that Qui-Gon has this, like, $1 million jewel on his shelf, and he just puts it like, oh, and then they gave it to me.
I got this.
It's not as important to him, but it reminds him of things. It keeps him in the moment in the future.
I kind of remember some of that, but it was just, I guess, like the way they said it and him thinking about it. I'm like, did they more specifically say anything about this gem that I don't know, or is it a tie to like some other comic or book or something where I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. So that's why I was like, okay,
it could be, but
sure, yeah.
I think it was just those two things of like Qui-Gon collects things from his adventures. This thing is very expensive. It's meant to be like the anti-logic that Pax has already gone through.
He's
like,
not holding on to it for value because Jedi really don't have. They don't need money or want money, have money, any of that, right? So it's like this to him is a memento.
Yeah,
he's gonna give it to help somebody in this moment and pass
just
off
like
that.
Pax gave his life to save someone. It doesn't make sense to him. But it doesn't matter if it makes sense to him. He cannot leave.
Yeah.
I cannot, like, he kept saying, like, I love the scene where Obi-Wan's, like, helping him with the ship, and he can tell that Pax is, like, not trying to hustle to fix the ship, because once the ship is fixed, he has no reason to stay. So he kind of, like, artificially just
slowing down.
Maybe she'll just show up, though, you know, because he doesn't want to have to deal with that logic. I thought it was really fun. Really, really cool character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rahara,
too, I thought was a really good character.
Yeah, very much so, in terms of...
Very motivated by the idea of, like, being a slave in her past, right?
Yeah, it's hard to speak about her and not mention Zerka, which... Zerka is in this.
Yeah.
Do you know do you remember Zerka?
I mean, Zerka was common in KOTOR and the Old Republic in general.
Yeah.
And they mentioned in this book how Zerka's been around for, like, hundreds of years or something like that, right? So it's not like it's a new company, but when they did mention Zerka in this, I was like, man... Have I thought, has there been any Zerka stuff in, like, prequels on that I can remember? And I was trying to remember, like, any newer Zerka stuff. And I'm like, I know of them in KOTOR and stuff.
Yeah,
but
so Zerka was first made in the source book for, like, tabletop RPGs back in the day, Wizards of the Coast.
Sure.
That's where Zerka came out from. And then Knights of the Old Republic did borrow a bunch of, like, stuff like that.
Like, the whole game's based on, like, a role-playing system.
But I'm pretty sure in canon, and again, I only know this... because I'm a freak that was trying to like learn everything about the movies. In Rogue One, a lot of the rebellion fighters, like Rushi Melscott, are using Zerka helmets.
Okay.
Also,
now is
one of the bounty hunters in the Clone Wars uses a Zerka issued blaster rifle too.
Now are those things where it's like this is stuff that's left over? Because like if you think about the sequel trilogy, right? They're using like chunks of stormtrooper armor, right, at some points, and even resistance where like they just have like old imperial armor sometimes to like make up their armor and stuff.
I imagine it's just the rebellion gets their hands on whatever they can find.
Like that's what we can get,
you know. And then you have stuff like Pablo Hidalgo, who's making news source books and being like, I'll just throw Zerka in there. You know, if you get it, you get it. If not, it's not a big deal. But he canonizes that thing, and then you have Zerka show up in this book. I'm like, holy shit. That's Zerka. That's they are.
It would be interesting if it's
terrible.
Like, I don't know how big Zerka is. Like, I mean, they make stuff. They're everywhere and stuff, I suppose. But like, if this hurts them so much that it destroys Zerka as a company, maybe because like they lost their slaves were revolting. You know, they were rebelling and stuff. And maybe that was maybe this marks like the end of Zerka or something. I don't know.
It wouldn't affect the whole company, the company as a whole. It's like, I mean, it's like going and attacking one Amazon business, center, right? Or what do they call them? The shop,
like a warehouse
things. Yeah, I don't want to trigger any Jeff Bezos, like, what they say they're going to attack. And I'm not hypothetically, if you were to like try to get revenge on Amazon by attacking one of those centers, it's like, well, you're not going to do much. They have millions.
Sure. Okay.
So I think it's more like that. It's just for this planet and for the planets along that new hyperway. Maybe they won't have as much of an influence.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure, that makes sense. But yeah, that was my question there with just mainly that Jim. That's kind of how we got into this. But let's get.
And then Rahara.
We're talking about Rahara more. Yeah. So like, I like that she was the one to keep pushing them, helping the Jedi, right? Because everything they were talking about, all the Jedi like business they had, and like Pax like, no, let's not do this. Why are we here? Let's just leave them. We've dropped them off. We should just get out of here, Yeah. But there's also like, now the Jedi are missing. We're the last two people to see them. And if we leave now, we're going to be suspects, so we better find these Jedi. Like, I like that she kind of forced it to happen. And then Pax, like, within his protocolness as well, was like, all right, now it makes sense to do this. Now it makes sense to do this. Well, now this doesn't make sense, but then she takes over and is like, well, we're going to do this part. Even to where she, like, jumps in like a fighter and, like, starts helping and covering, and then a droid rips off the canopy and scans her face.
Heartbreaking.
And I'm like, no. When it's like get jabbed into her wrist again, I'm like, no.
I know.
I was like, I don't want this.
When it happened.
I'm like, I hate that. I hate this.
And Pax got her those gloves just to avoid that completely without even mentioning it. But then they talk about the face scanning thing. Yeah, man. Like, that was a hard scene to read. It was even harder whenever she's down in the mines and she thought, like, oh no, I just made all that up. I wasn't a jewel thief.
Oh yeah.
I've always been a slave, and I just was trying to, like, that was so sad.
She has to like push away the thoughts of what life outside would be because then it either gives you hope, which sometimes can be bad to have, or like you're thinking of what it is, and then we saw in I guess we didn't see. We read in Rebel Rising, right? What some slaves are thinking and what it goes through when it's like, I know what the outside world could be, and this is what my life is, and I don't want it to be this anymore, And it's like, it's terrible. So that's a heart-wrenching kind of moment there.
It is. I think especially just because for me, I mean, this is a little bit too much of a personal story, but when I was a young man that was very certain in certain convictions, I went to a university called Liberty University, which was very Christian, like super Christian, like the kind of super Christian you like want to avoid, right?
Okay.
And we had a class about slavery because slavery is very much mentioned in biblical literature and in certain books of the Bible, and like. This guy was trying to tell me why it was like, it's not like slavery like like it's in the Bible. It's the good type, I remember being like,
it's the good type.
There's
of slavery.
A good type, and he would go over the Gentiles in those books were the ones that were to be enslaved. Jewish slaves had different things. They have the Jubilee. They have the different ways that you can keep someone enslaved. Like, okay, well, we'll release you, but if you had a kid while you were enslaved, then we're going to keep the kid.
Yep.
And
that's the Zerka way, too.
And that's, like, very much Zerka is this system in which you will never escape, but no one cares because the fine print isn't there, right?
Yep.
Like, you go into some of the books of the Bible, the fine print's not great, and it's really hard to try to be like, I don't know, So that was, like... It's an issue that I had particularly with one scholar at that university that kind of made me go like, I really need to take a step back and figure out what I'm doing here.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's very like, I don't know, personal feeling that when Qui-Gon's having that conversation with the deputy or whoever of Zerka, and he's like, "There's really nothing I can do, is there?" And she goes like with like a smile, like, "No, that was so evil." And when Rahara has that conversation with the protocol droid, she's like, I can speak to protocol droids. Maybe I can logic him into letting me go. And it gets to the point where it's like, why do they keep sentient slaves? Like, aren't droids better in every way when it comes to that? And the droid just goes like, well, they do it because they can, which is just as evil a statement made in complete logic, you know?
Yeah.
And those moments, I just felt so helpless for her. And when both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan separately have a plan to get her out, I like that. Fuck yes, Jedi! This is why I watch this shit.
I love when Obi-Wan
read this shit. I'm sorry.
When Obi-Wan comes in and stuff, and he's like, "Well, I already knew you were doing this because I saw your stuff when I went to go do this."
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god, I'm so happy.
And Obi-Wan had such a great plan too.
Yeah.
About like, well, everybody's gonna be ready with the coronation, so just sleep in there. And Qui-Gon's like, that's so brilliant.
Yeah.
I should have thought of my own.
I love the comparison between the two. Which we haven't dove into them as much, I think, as I want to yet. But like the strengths each of them have and the weaknesses they both have too. Like at one point, Qui-Gon's like talking about the contract. He's like, Obi-Wan's looking it over. He understands this kind of stuff much better than I do. You know? And I'm like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I love the moments where those two are opposed but also a team.
Yeah,
which really informs some scenes that we get in episode 1.
Sure,
I think
there's so many moments where I'm picturing like, this is the negotiations were short kind of moment. Like that's the Obi-Wan I'm picturing here, you know, versus later on. Like there's even moments where it's like, what's the line in episode 1? Why do I feel we've picked up another useless life form? You know, I'm like, I kind of feel that a little bit more and understand it a little bit more.
And I really felt the heartbreak of Qui-Gon when Obi-Wan is trying to explain to him like, hey, I called the council. Like Qui-Gon goes through like 4 different scenarios that he's just making up because he can't possibly think that Obi-Wan did it. Mm-hmm. That was a heartbreaking moment too.
Yeah.
No.
I don't think we mentioned it. Rehara was the cast idea was Gemma Chan, which she was Cersei from Eternals. She was also in Crazy Rich Asians.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's anything else. Those are the 2 that I really... Oh, she was also a voice in Raya in The Last Dragon.
Gotcha.
So there's a few things. Minerva in Captain Marvel. So there's a few things that I recognize that she has been in.
Okay.
So I want to make sure we mention that because we were talking about the casting of everybody and stuff as well.
Sure.
I think we had one more casting that she had in mind, which was Halen. Let me see here. Let's see. Halen was that was the Zerka person, right?
There's Merritt Cole.
I'm trying to remember which one was Halen.
There's another. I guess maybe I'm a little confused by it.
But Halen they had as Uzo Aduba. Is that how you say it? Which is a voice in Lightyear with a new Lightyear movie, as well as in Orange is the New Black.
Okay, Halen is Azuka. Okay, the leader of the opera.
That's what it was. Yeah, okay. That's right.
I was like, Halen, I can't remember Halen.
I'm bad with names.
She had that like parade float where it's like, I surrender.
Yeah.
When that first started coming out, I was like, is this lady like singing or something?
They were talking about the noises and stuff and all that kind of stuff. They did the big balloon, right? Yeah. All those. And they also saved Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon.
Okay.
Right?
All right, so I'm familiar with this actress then. Okay, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
Man, where have I seen her at? I've seen that actress in something. Orange is the New Black?
Orange is the New Black is her most common one. That was the one I said a little bit ago. Mrs. America, she's in that. His voice is My Little Pony.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but yeah, her character, I like that. I like, so I'm trying to think, now that I'm picturing exactly who she is now, the moment when they save Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, right? Like they're in the woods, they're fighting the Black Guard who have these shields where you can't even cut him with a lightsaber.
Right.
It just bounces off. It's like, well, what do you do here? And I love that in that moment too, Qui-Gon like, let me cut this tree and I'll use this tree, you know, and he's hiding in it. But I like when they first meet and he's like, well, who are you? It's like, we're the opposition. You know, it's like, oh, okay, what are we doing with this now? But
they were cool. They reminded me a lot of like, this is what Naboo would be like if Palpatine wasn't so good at his job, right? In terms of like they're artists and performance artists and political activists. They don't really practice violence, but Naboo will be known as the homeworld of the Emperor of the Galaxy that rules by force. Like he kind of takes that from them, like that identity in a way, you know?
Yeah.
And I felt like that's what kind of was happening here.
I didn't think about that. That's neat. That's a neat
idea. When you think about prophecy, when you think about what what events that are happening now could tell you about the future. Like, again, it's all there,
Yeah.
It's all, it rhymes. When George Lucas was like, saying that rhymes, everybody made fun of him. It's like, he's right. Don't boo him.
Rhymes. There's one more I missed on my list here, which was Fannery.
Okay.
Which they had as Sadie
Princess.
Sink.
Sadie Sink.
Which
Why do
she's
I
Max from Stranger Things, which is probably what most people would know her
I
from.
could see her as a warrior queen that maybe went a little too far.
Sure. So I'm sure she's in some other stuff. She's in Fear Street. But yeah, the main thing people are going to know her from is going to be Stranger Things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She had one of the best seasons that anybody's had on that show recently. So, yeah, I can see
really
that.
good stuff. But as far as Fannery went, like you said, the twist that we have with the character, and
it's the perfect kind of twist too, because Qui-Gon knows there's a twist coming. And that's always the thing. Like, you don't want to tell people there's a twist coming.
Well, because he's looking. I love the way they describe his looking around, right?
Yeah.
I like like he was so focused on this guy that he's like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be that guy right there.
So was I. I'm sitting there like, okay, he keeps having this vision. I'm like, something crazy is gonna happen, but I have no idea what. So in my head, I'm doing what we do at Blind Wave. I'm writing fucking theories. I'm like, I know exactly what it is.
This is who it is.
And then that little girl stabs that priest in the back, and I was like, holy fuck!
I love how they describe it, where it's like he was so focused on. Was it Darren?
Yeah, Commander Darren.
So focused on Darren that he almost missed her grabbing the sword and stabbing this person. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I enjoyed that a lot. And then they reveal like where the shields really came from and what their main use probably was. But they also work for sabers.
When Obi-Wan, his lightsaber turns on, it's orange, and it like does.
Were you confused?
I was like,
"Is it bleeding?"
I was like,
"What's happening here?"
I was like, Obi-Wan Kenobi's the smartest motherfucker alive. He did that. He knew it was going to happen. That's what I thought.
Oh, really?
I thought like, there's a negotiator. There's a guy that out-thought this stuff, and Qui-Gon's gonna be very impressed. And he was like, "Master, what's wrong with my lightsaber?
It's broken."
I'm like, Obi-Wan, you idiot.
But no, whenever they were talking about that, I was like, man, maybe it's like. I'm like, I don't know what bleeding a lightsaber is like to get the red saber. Maybe you're kind of like trying to transition it. Did he do this? Was he like testing on stuff? Did someone do it to him? Like, what does this mean?
No, I immediately
was he so angry in the moment or something? And that's what's I didn't know what it was.
Gotcha. I immediately knew it was a changing of the crystal.
You knew it was the crystal changed?
Like, it's the only thing that makes sense because they kept doing the Kyber that's not Kyber.
The Kyber that's not Kyber.
And I'm like, well, and Avaros is just like, it was just a happy accident. They just needed to have the same weight.
Yeah. Right?
I love the way he speaks though. But no, it was a really cool moment. There's been a lot in various expanded universe and old legends and stuff of like resistant to lightsaber stuff. We currently have Beskar in the canon, but there's Cortosis and there's Ferric and there's all these other various things that I feel like that concept can get a little bloated sometimes. But I like the way it was done here, especially as a way for Qui-Gon to know the time of prophecy is now, because the Kyber that is not Kyber will show itself, which you could probably go all throughout the galaxy and find different interpretations of that. But for him, it was that, which was interesting.
Yeah. Like that seems to be a big push of like, well, what else could this be? What else is Kyber that's not Kyber?
I want to jump into the prophecies.
You want to talk about prophecy stuff?
Like even just that one right there. Like what was the wording of that one? Kyber
so Kyber. There is when the Kyber that is not Kyber shines forth, the time of the prophecy will be at hand. Like which I mean, if you want like the main prophecy too, which might be what we want as well, because all this is going to tie to that as well, right? So only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the nameless. The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the galaxy entire. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. A chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored.
Do you know where the source is for that full prophecy?
For that one there?
Because I think the book only has the last line.
Only the last line?
Yeah.
I will have to ask Nexus who sent him over to me.
All right.
Because I was like,
I like it. I like prophecy for me is best when it's put the way that this book puts it, in that it's almost useless, in that there is great value, but you could look at so many galactic events and say, oh, that's what that was, like
sure, yeah,
like the Kyber that is not Kyber thing, right? Like,
well, it's
you could say that's Anakin Skywalker. He is the Jedi that's not a Jedi, but brings balance to the Force. Or you could say that about Palpatine, like he's the good, kind-hearted senator from Naboo, but actually he's not. He's a Sith Lord.
Or, like he could be the egg, even. He could be the Palpatine egg. Could be the egg that is like once it cracks and his outer shell of being the good guy cracks, you're gonna need this person to do this or something. Like it depends how you want to look at it.
But what I've always liked about prophecy and stories isn't that this is someone peeking into the future as much as this is somebody from who knows what, seeing something and not understanding it, right? Like if you try to go into, I'll go into a biblical thing just because it's the only thing I really know about. Like biblical prophecies, you can have, John who was on who was on an island whenever he was writing Revelation, and it's like this giant dragonfly and this and this and this, and then people in our time will be like, he's talking about helicopters. But John doesn't know what a helicopter is like, so he sees a dragonfly. I'm like, that makes sense, But people have been doing that, Aaron, for 2,000 years.
Depends what you want to reason with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which why I think that's the most interesting thing about prophecy is that you can't know for sure.
Yeah. Like the one that we were talking about mainly, though, when the Kyber that is not Kyber shines forth, the time of the prophecy will be at hand. Like, I understand Qui-Gon looking at that and being like, well, this is a Kyber that's not Kyber. It works in a lightsaber.
Sure.
How many non-Kyber things can you have that will also make a saber form
and doesn't explode in your hand?
Yeah, like it can't be that many things that do that.
Yeah.
But also, like I was thinking about this too because I was like, oh, well, Obi-Wan is 17. I was like, shoot, how old was he in episode 1? Because I talked about this just recently.
20.
And he's 25 in episode 1.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so it's 8 years, which means that Anakin is like 1-ish, So like maybe
the time of prophecy, sure.
This occurring means like the time of prophecy is near because Anakin has been born. The non-fathered, which let me see here. I think there's another one. And it depends too of how you want to read them and how you want to interpret them and whatnot too.
What's the one about the in the book? They give a theory of like, oh yeah, this lady takes over her father's kingdom and she's a dark Jedi. That Dooku was mentioning. Do we have that one?
Let's see. Well, I can go through all of them I have.
Yeah,
I don't
let's do
see
that.
the one that you're mentioning right away, but I'll start with the first one that I have on this list. She who will be born to darkness.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Will give birth to darkness.
Yeah.
So I mean that one.
Leia.
That one could be Leia. I mean, born to darkness, giving birth to darkness.
And when I say Leia, I'm not saying like that's what it is. I'm saying like, isn't it cool that
if you look at the idea of Kylo, right?
Sure, but like I can be like, well, what do I know? But what prophecies don't talk about is what you don't know.
Sure, right? Like I don't know how, Shmi Skywalker was born. Like, was she born to darkness? She's born into slavery, maybe,
she's a slave.
Like, could you have something like that? And then, like, we'll give birth to darkness. Is that meaning Anakin, who then kills the Jedi Order? Like, is that the darkness they're talking about, or not? Lots of times the chosen one is looked at as being Anakin Skywalker, who will bring balance. But does that also mean, like, well, to bring balance, there's a lot of Jedi, not a lot of Sith. We got to kind of level the playing field a little bit,
Try to think of like anybody reading that. That's the thing I think is really interesting about this book. Qui-Gon reads it and immediately thinks, "Oh, this is about me," in a way.
Yeah.
Dooku does the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, I think anybody that reads prophecies go like, "How does this apply to me?" Which is what we do as sentient beings. We don't think about what it actually is. We first think, "How does this apply to me?" and then we go to other places. So I think that's really interesting.
Speaking of Dooku, an interesting one could be. He who learns to conquer death will, through his greatest student, live again. Right? And, like, when I first heard, like, he who learns to conquer death, I'm like, oh, well, Palpatine learns to conquer death, right? Like, that's the whole thing with Plagueis and Palpatine and midichlorians to create life and, what he does in the sequel trilogy and everything, too. I'm like, that's that there. But then also there's the idea of, like, well, when Qui-Gon dies and then exists afterwards, pushes Yoda and Qui-Gon to be able to be Force ghosts and stuff too. Like, is there a thing where it's like, well, he has died, but he can conquer death. He can teach Obi-Wan there on Tatooine, which could be his, what was the line? His greatest student.
His greatest student.
I mean, I don't know how many other students he would have had, but
You can apply that to so many situations too. Like it doesn't have to be a literal death. It can be a figurative death, like Anakin Skywalker. He doesn't die, but he kind of does.
Yeah, but even he himself says that Anakin Skywalker is dead.
Yeah,
and Darth Vader is what remains. You know,
but like, no, he's not. You're him, dummy.
Sure.
Palpatine's sure, yeah. Anakin died. I don't know what happened. And then he closed the door and he's like, man, that guy needs therapy.
Another one here is, when the righteous lose the light, evil once dead shall return. Mm-hmm. So is that like the Sith as a whole?
Yeah.
Are we talking about like the Jedi kind of?
The Jedi giving up the idea that they're, they should be shepherds, right?
Yeah.
That they protect the sheep, but instead, they become sheep themselves and just get pushed in different directions, and they become the shepherd.
Like, what's the idea that they have where it's like they're kind of like policing for the Republic rather than being there for everyone, right? Like in the High Republic, it feels more of like, sure, they have the "We are the Republic," but it feels more like they're trying to branch out, but also willing to help whoever. It's not about like, are you good, are you bad? It's like, well, we're going to help you and save you.
It's preposterous that a Jedi should ever come to a situation where he has to be like, all right, we'll accept the slavery.
Yeah, right?
Preposterous. It should never happen.
This is bad, and we should stop it.
I very much appreciate the book also going into like, hey, there are species that don't look at that word and feel the same way. There are hive minds that exist, But I think the thing they really tried to push is like, well, that's the society that they live in, right?
Yeah, like Geonosis have like that queen hive mind bug thing, right? Like
it's a biological thing, right?
I wouldn't necessarily want to say like all the Geonosians are slaves to the queen. Sure. That's kind of the way their species works.
How they evolved.
Yeah.
And how they, like how their society is structured. Like humans are, it's the only thing that we can really talk about, but humans are a societal species. Like we only exist in a group. We don't exist as individuals. That's not how any of this works. It's not how laws work. It's not how evolution works. Nothing,
Sure.
So to have the ideal of like you cannot take someone else's freedom. You can't do that because you don't want someone to take your freedom, and thus the golden rule, right? Like the insectoid species as part of the hive mind dies without that hive mind.
Without that hive mind, yeah.
But people that are employed by Zerka or owned by Zerka, they don't die. I mean, they thrive when they're gone.
I'm sure if the Yuzhang Vong showed up and took all the Zerka people and put them as slaves, they wouldn't be happy with it as being like, this is how it should be.
Yeah, like humanity has thrived in designing systems in which you can't control what part of the system you're in. So design it so that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love the book for tackling a lot of very hard questions.
Sure.
Like that.
It does. And it does it all in a really Star Wars-y way, and it seems to all fit, too. I think there is one more here of the prophecies.
Okay.
One will ascend to the highest of the Jedi, despite the foreboding of those who would serve with him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that one feels like an Anakin thing, right? Like, we grant you the seat on the council, but you are not a master.
Yeah.
I
feel like with that prophecy, I think you can find a lot of examples, but I think that's like, with prophecy, like, if you want to make me believe it, you got to be real specific. Like that one could be like, well, yeah, all people punch up.
Sure. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something else there. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Sure.
Like the darkness one, like you went to Leia right away. I think I went to Shmi right away because I was like, well, wasn't she born into slavery or was she caught? But I don't know as much of her history as I do like Leia's, right?
I mean, regardless of what you believe what happened to Shmi, like you can say she was born in darkness in the idea that she is the lowest of the low. She is a slave on Tatooine with the Hutts. Like, it's not even like she's like a peasant or someone that sells dollies, down the street. She's a slave for Hutts, which has to be worse than a slave for Zerka.
Yeah.
If you really think about it, even though, she got like a house and stuff.
Yeah, she had someplace to live at least and stuff. But no, there's a lot of these where I feel like they could kind of be like this or that.
Yeah.
He who conquers death, I'm like, well,
sure.
Could that be Palpatine? Could that be Qui-Gon? Like, what does it mean to conquer death? Is it a literal death? Is it a figurative death?
Exactly.
Could it be Anakin who, well, he conquered death and became Darth Vader?
Sure.
I don't know. You could toss a lot of these things so many ways. So it's really hard to be like, well, let me study this prophecy. But like that's what Qui-Gon does, and he's looking for them too. and like he believes he finds it when he finds Anakin Skywalker. And it's like, is he right with it? Is it just this is how he is interpreting it, so he believes himself to be right? Or is there a better example somewhere else that he doesn't know, he hasn't seen, you know?
And, you know, we get these prophecies from ancient mystics. The Jedi don't do them anymore, right? Because there's that I love that conversation about power, like, you know, wanting to know the future ultimately comes from fear. Because you don't want something bad to happen. You don't want something bad to happen. You want something good to happen, and I can make it happen because I can see the future, you know? Like, I love that conversation. But I also don't want to go look at all of these prophecies and say all of these must be true, right? Just because one's true doesn't make they're all true. And in fact, if always in motion the future is, if that's true, then prophecies that were true can no longer be true, right? In a way, if you think about it. Like, does a prophecy mean this shit never changes and the guy that thought this stuff up, he was right? Or was he right at a time, or was he no longer right? You know, like I think there's really interesting, fun ways to think about stories, especially when they apply to prophecies. When you do that, I like that the book does both.
Yeah, I also enjoyed the where they had this prophecy holocron, which I thought was interesting too, because I know they had a prophecy, and like them just diving into more of it, and like, well, how did they study this? What did they do? And they like. I would figure that since they didn't really deal with it too much, that they would kind of get rid of it, but they didn't, and they still had it. And like Qui-Gon's like checking it out. He's like, "Oh, I won't take it to the bedroom or whatever anymore." Like, I was like, "Well, don't just do it in public." You know, like there's kind of like a, should you be looking into this? Should you not be looking into this? And it's almost taboo in a way.
It is.
And I kind of enjoyed like the way they handle that and how you use that and what you do with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all of the prophecies themselves. I just was really interested in kind of like reading them in a separate sense and being kind of talking them out rather than just hearing it through the book and being like, okay, what does Qui-Gon think? You know, it's like, well, he's not going to know what they mean necessarily either, you know, but from the grand scheme of Star Wars, what does it mean?
I just love when they have these giant conversations and it ends up being like, this is both very important and not at all.
Yep. Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, what's the point? Just like Rail does when he talks about the prophecy of the Chosen One. It's like, if it's equal light and dark, what's the point of fighting? That's how it's going to end up. That's what balance is. Well, and you want to go like, motherfucker, you're right. What is the point? Like, no matter how much I push, the opposite side is going to push just as hard, and we're going to balance, right? But if I don't push, then they'll push more than we will, and it won't be balanced. So
someone
what
has
do you do?
To be the light.
Exactly.
And if there is no light, then you just have dark. Or if there is no dark, you just have light. So yeah, you have to. If you give up on being the light, who is going to be the light? And you could say like, well, the balance will happen, and then someone else will step up to be the light. But maybe you're meant to be the light, and that's what the Force is guiding you to do.
And if balance is meant to be the goal, then if I were a Jedi and believed that, I'd be going crazy. I'd be like, every single thing I do, like to the utmost of my ability, to the point of exhaustion, might be what I need to do to balance out the bad shit that's happening. Like, what if my calling is to go so far it's insane, but that's because on the other side, there's someone like Palpatine that goes so far it's insane, you know? So I would be like, when is it ever enough? Just like Rail does, where I'm like, I don't even know what to do now. It's really interesting.
I did like that. And by the end, we were talking about Rail before and stuff, and like how we thought maybe would he be antagonistic? You know, where would he fall with stuff? I like the conversation they had at the end of the book where Dooku like comes to him, you know, and he's like, "You should join me," you know. And he's like, I think I'll find something else to do. So I like the way that they kind of like bring him to the end of that. I'm curious to see if we see more of him and what like that character will be like too with Dooku and everything.
Yeah.
I'm not done with the book yet because I didn't.
You got more.
I didn't get to mention one of my favorite things from Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon because we didn't like specify Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon things. I love that he had a connection with the Vactyl writing thing. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And as soon as they said about that, I started thinking about Episode 3 and whatnot. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, man. I love the whole. Like, I love flying.
Right? That was the other one that I really enjoyed too. Because like, not only did he go from like. It's weird because we have like this Obi-Wan who doesn't really have these experiences yet. Yeah. And we're like, oh, I love it. I've always wanted to fly. This is so cool and stuff. And it's like, well, where does that? What happens?
I know.
Because eventually, like, you're like, oh, I always hated flying. And it's like, why?
I love the moment at the end of the the whole thing.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan is flying through hallways.
Well, it's on like autopilot, right? He can't even control it?
He can steer it, but he can't make it stop moving.
Okay.
So he's like on rails in a way.
Yeah.
But he is moving it. And like I love that they start out with like, oh, I love flying. Anytime he gets a chance to fly, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Something has to change here. Mm-hmm. And then he goes to the Varacta one. I'm like, oh, okay. He mentions like, I actually kind of enjoyed that more than I did the Starfighter. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I see he has mounts. He has the Opie and Obi-Wan series, and maybe that's why he doesn't like flying anymore. And then that happens, and he like crash lands into the place, and he comes out, and Qui-Gon's like,
what are you doing there?
And he goes, I suppose there's no way I can convince you I did that on purpose.
I love that. I also loved when they're doing it. It's like,
oh, it's so funny.
I forget exactly what it was, but it was like the only thing he could think of to say was, ah! That part, I just started laughing. I was like, it was so funny. I love that part. Yeah, but yeah, just getting that moment.
That was so cinematic. That one.
I love. That's one of those things where I've talked about like. It's fun sometimes to see like, well, where does this kind of stuff come from? Why do they hate flying? You know?
Yeah.
Like, and I really enjoyed that. I also, by the end of it too, where Qui-Gon has given up the council. He's like, I'm not gonna do that. And he's talking to Obi-Wan. He's like, if you would still keep me as your master, I would like to still be your master. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, I was thinking, I'll probably learn more from someone I disagree with anyway.
Yeah,
you know?
Was cute.
And I was like, I like this so much.
That was great. And then the epilogue that takes place during the funeral of Episode 1, Obi-Wan is looking back on all the great times he had with his master, and they all come after this book. Like, which is I think is a really good way to end it. Like, I think that you could get to that scene and be like, well, fuck, write a book about that, you know?
Right.
But I think it's even better this way because it's like the turmoil that they go through and the drama they go through, like, that's the real shit. I mean, yeah, it's cool to think about all the other adventures that you go on, but this is the moment. It's like, after that, we were best friends. Like, that's the story I want to hear.
Yeah. Well, and I just love the idea, like, well, they finally connected, and there's still 8 years of, like, what do they do in this 8-year period of time, you know? And we just... Hopefully, I wouldn't mind getting
Disney
more books
Plus
or something
special about that, you know?
Yeah.
Just one of those.
I just don't know how you do animated.
40 minutes.
Make it animated, maybe.
You could do that.
That might be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, but I want Ewan to be Obi-Wan, but he's a little older now. I don't know.
I don't care.
50-year-old, 20-year-old.
I'd watch it. He's out there like, you know, hey, kids, it's me, fellow kid, Obi-Wan.
Where's Steve Buscemi? Hey, kids. So I just want to make sure I mention those because those are some of my favorite things in the book too. Was like the Qui-Gon Obi-Wan moments and stuff, and I just liked the laugh out loud moments and stuff. The ones that made me have a reaction in a book is like some of the things like, oh my god, like crying, laughing, all those kind of things. Sometimes I'm just like, listen, oh okay, that's cool. But I like the ones that make me actually react.
Yeah.
So, but anyway.
Yep.